Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. This video, I'll be reviewing the DM's Guild supplement, Nameia's Crimson Tome, designed by Stratos Fotakis for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links for your DM's Guild shopping, supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Shouts to my platinum patrons, Andrew, Richard, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Nick, Andy, Chris, and Alberto, and gold patrons, RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy, Nima, Marcos, Did, Vicente, Gilberto, Shane, K, Cert 2B, Adam, Dead Lizard Lounge, Sam, Ross, Limpy Spuds, and Jerome. Thank you all very much for your support. So, last year I reviewed Nameia's Crimson Laboratory, I believe it was called, and it had a lot of fun ideas, but I wasn't particularly impressed with the overall design structure. It was basically just a dungeon crawl, and it had this fancy villain that was kind of underused. Nameia's Crimson Tome is not a sequel to that adventure. It is a spin-off supplement, which is not the first time this has happened. I recently reviewed by Remley Farr the Dwergus follow-up, which the first one was an adventure, and then the second one was a supplement with a bunch of monsters in it. So this supplement is way bigger than that one was. This is a nearly 100-page supplement, which includes, and I had to write it down because it's all itemized, 12 new subclasses, 25 spells, 22 collective ritual spells, 15 magic items, 27 monster stat blocks converted from earlier editions of D&D into 5th edition, 24 new NPC stat blocks, 2 for each of the new player subclasses, as well as a new villainous faction called the Crimson Order, which includes multiple high-level, I'm talking like CR 18 NPC leaders. That is a pretty big damn supplement. And it's all surrounded by a pretty neat theme, which is blood. Nameia is part of this blood cult called the Crimson Order. They worship the Blood Lord. Every single subclass here involves blood, using your own life force, manipulating enemy life force, all of that stuff. It's all about sangromancy, or they call it in this supplement, which is a neat idea. And I appreciate a supplement that has that kind of theme. So all the magic items have to do with blood. All of the monsters are, blood demons and blood oozes and blood golems and that kind of thing. It's got a really good theme. It also has really fantastic art throughout by Alexandros Balatsaurus. I apologize so much for butchering the name, but really fantastic artwork for all of the NPCs at the end, as well as the magic items and just art throughout, which is a huge thumbs up for me. The layout is decent and fine, no complaints there. I still have to register a complaint about the actual writing, however, and this is a problem I ran into when reviewing Nameia's laboratory, which was just a lot of grammatical errors, just kind of easy stuff like, using the wrong form of its or putting a comma somewhere or just having an awkward sentence structure. It badly needs to have an editor go through the entire piece and just clean it up. It wasn't to where, I didn't understand what the author was trying to do with any one particular, paragraph or sentence or anything, but and typically, if it's just a few errors here and there, we're all human. We all make mistakes. I usually don't even mention anything. But if it's enough where I'm seeing repeat offenders and problems throughout, and it's distracting for me, then I will call you out on it. Unfortunately, those errors plague this one as the same they plagued Nameia's laboratory. But I can go through it fairly briefly here. As I said, nearly 100 pages separated into chapters. We get new subclasses, new monsters, new magic items, and new spells, as well as that new faction, which is good. Subclasses, one for each class. So we have 12. Now, when you think about blood magic, you generally think of like sorcerers and warlocks. And sure enough, some of the classes in here use that better than others. It really feels kind of heavy-handed to try and adapt the blood magic concept into every single class. Although, thumbs up for giving the bards the College of Blood painting, which is incredibly creepy, but also really fun. It reminds me of like a unique Final Fantasy character or something. But you can literally paint. First of all, you can paint like blood marks on enemies, which has a bunch of different effects usable with your bardic inspiration, and you can also construct your own animated paintings, which you can use with your reaction or your bonus action to attack or defend you, which is really that's some Castlevania shit, and I love it. I'm here for it. Most of them just aren't that interesting. You know, the cleric domain, the fighter, the ranger, they're just not. They don't do a whole lot of really interesting things. I'm trying to highlight the ones that I particularly liked, but I hope that the author didn't feel the need to just, oh, well, if I'm going to make a couple, I might as well make one for every single class, because I don't necessarily think that the theme of using blood needs to be done for every single class. And it does feel like it's stretched a little too thin, whereas some of them, I think it ends up being really, really cool. So the monk, I already passed the monk. Where are you, monk? Way of the Crimson Blade. You can actually manifest these blood blades out of your body, which is really cool. You literally suffer damage, but then you can do necrotic damage and you increase your reach by 10 feet. And whenever you do Flurry of Blows, you can add a bunch of other effects on top of it, including regaining hit points equal to half the damage, which is very, very cool. You can also spend key points to gain Blind Sight, which is you like sensing people's blood. That's all that is really cool stuff. And then the Druid, I also particularly enjoyed. Let's see, what are Druids? Are those circles? There you go. Circle of the Blood Court. The Druid has like a laundry list of just amazing abilities. You can spend hit dice to add damage or healing, which I do like the concept of, for using blood magic, spending hit dice to get immediate results, because those are more long lasting than just spending your like current life force. You actually spend that hit dice, which you only get back. You only get hit dice back in a long rest, and even then, you only get half of your hit dice back for every long rest. So that is definitely a more risk reward element. So I do, and that is used quite a bit throughout all these different mechanics, using hit dice versus just taking the damage, although that's used as well. You gain monstrosities as a wild shape form, which is crazy powerful. Like all druids, normally you have to take that one certain kind of druid. I think it's Circle of the Moon to be able to wild shape with basically any kind of combat prowess. And this one gives it to you at 6th level. You suddenly gain basically the Circle of the Moon um, wild shape scaling ability, and also you can transform into monstrosities. You also gain proficiency with con saving throws at 10th level, and when you drop to 0 hit points, you can actually bump back up to 1 and use wild shape as a reaction. Talk about just a laundry list of just amazing druid abilities on there. But for all of those, that's unfortunately kind of the minority. Most of them weren't very impressive. Even the blood sorcerer, which you would think that a blood sorcerer would be like the defining subclass of all of these, is just not very impressive. Like the biggest thing about it is you can spend, again, you can spend your hit dice to recover spell slots, and that's about it. You can cast a certain kind of spell and deal necrotic damage per spell slots, and then try to regain that health back. That's about it. That's all you can do. The Warlock is probably my third favorite one, where you essentially pledge yourself. Hi, dear. You essentially pledge yourself to the Blood Lord, and you become a like partial vampire, and it has its own invocations, which is cool to see. But I think there are maybe 3 or 4 of these which are truly impressive, which is not a good ratio out of 12 total subclasses. The ones I like, I really do like, but most of them I was kind of ho hum about. So just it's an interesting exercise in how, I think the blood theme is a cool one that's worth exploring, but most of the classes don't necessarily need a blood themed subclass to go with it. All right, the spells are really fun, and this is again, even if your blood sorcerer isn't that impressive with the abilities that you have, there are a lot of really fun spells here, and I did enjoy these. This kind of, the subclasses was the first part, and I was kind of ho hum about it, and then I got right back into it with the spells, because these spells are really, really fun. You can transform somebody's blood into a hound and summon up this bloodhound creature. You can use blood to uh, transform itself into a blade. You can coat a weapon to add more damage. You can transform blood into an armor. You can use blood as this piercing spear, which is really cool because it actually deals additional damage for every person that it hits, which is very nice to see. And of course, you can use blood spells as healing by dealing damage to yourself or spending hit dice. You can maybe heal somebody else. So there's a lot of really cool, and there's also like kind of the basic stuff, which is you just deal, additional necrotic damage or something else. But I did love the fact of blood as being more of this manipulative tool rather than just straight direct damage. And especially when you can, transform blood into like physical things, I think that's a really cool visual and drives home how cool blood magic can be used. So I think that's a really neat aspect, and there's a lot of good spells in here. Ritual casting is a little strange because it kind of comes out of nowhere and doesn't quite fit the theme of this book as much. I was, again, all the subclasses are blood themed, all the spells are blood themed. And then all of a sudden we get into these ritual castings, which are not, there's only like two or three that have to do with actual blood stuff. It's like this could almost be like a separate supplement somewhere else. But essentially, it's designed for like, I picture like the Coven of Hags or something, or a bunch of cultists gathered around casting a spell. And there's actually mechanics for it. So you get a bunch of spellcasters together. They use a certain spell slot in order to cast basically high powered versions of a spell. So, for example, conjure animal spirits. You can conjure 3 beasts of challenge rating 2 or lower instead of the normal version, which I believe is that a 3rd level spell, I think, where you can summon 1 beast of a challenge rate or 2 or lower, and call Lightning Storm, which is, I've got off my head, 3rd, 4th, or 5th level spell. Um, this one's just twice as big. It's a 20-foot tall, 120-foot radius instead of a 10-foot tall, 60-foot radius, and it deals, I think, 1 more D10 of damage. So it's just a way of doing better versions of already existing spells, most of them to do with summoning. It just doesn't quite fit the blood theme. I mean, it's kind of interesting. I feel like most of these would be used by enemies. You come across a bunch of cultists like doing the thing, but that kind of thing you just see more in the text of the adventure itself, saying, "Hey, with the players come up on here, here's what's going to happen if they can't interrupt anybody," rather than creating all of these mechanics and certain spells for it. So you can use this as a jumping off point for, cultists, or maybe a weird case would come in where players are involved in this as well. Maybe they join somebody else. Maybe you have to keep up the concentration to summon this thing. I don't know, but it's just kind of an odd ad. Doesn't quite fit the theme of the book, but it seems like solid information. The balancing is kind of hard to wrap my head around because, again, it costs multiple spellcasters. It still costs a spell slot in order to pump up a single spell, most of which is summoning related. The Crimson Order probably should have been nearer the end because it's the most lore heavy. This is, there's no adventure material in this supplement, but this you could spin off into its own adventure or subquest. And honestly, there's enough detail and lore and history and NPCs here equal to, I would say, one of the elemental cult factions from the 5e campaign book Princes of the Apocalypse, which I'm going to use as a big compliment because I think one of the best things that adventure does is really make those cults come to life with all of the thematic enemies and the cult leaders that it has, as well as obviously the dungeons themselves. This one we don't get like the dungeon or anything, but we do have NPCs. We have a lot of information about how the cult operates. They all worship. I'm not going to try to pronounce it. Oh yeah, I will try to pronounce this. Haim Haimnathun, the Blood Lord, who's a corpse drifting out in the astral sea, and a bunch of folks worship him because that's what folks do. And we get a lot of really high level NPC stat blocks. They've all got their own original art. They've got huge amounts of backstory. It's good material. It's good, a springboard for a different story. Yeah, I love the art throughout here. It's a cool ad. I enjoy this quite a bit. Legendary actions and layer actions for all of them. Nameia is just one of, even though she was the villain of the mini dungeon in Nameia's laboratory, she is only one of all of these different cultists. Although I think she is one of the higher level challenge rating villains here. And there's the ultimate bosses. This happy looking fellow, Galindon, which actually most of them are pretty tragic. None of them are just horrible, horrible villains. They've all got kind of nice backstories, and they feel like they're, decently interesting villains to be used in any kind of campaign. So, pretty thumbs up for that section. Magic items, another good addition, like the blood spells. They all use the theme very, very well. My favorite is definitely the blood symbiote, which, if you're thinking, Marvel, Venom, Carnage, you are absolutely on the right track. You can form it into a different kind of weapon to use. You can use its gibbering mouther ability to do extra attack damage, and you can replace your own limb, a leg or an arm or something, with this symbiote, and of course just form that into a weapon as if you were like the T-1000 or Venom or Carnage or something. So that's absolutely fantastic, and of course it's cursed. You can't part with it because it is a symbiote, and it does not want to be parted from you. But just good use of all the blood theme stuff. Dagger of Sacrifice allows you to essentially turn whatever you are already into a blood magic user, because you can sacrifice your own life force. What is it? You suffer 1d8 necrotic damage per spell level just to cast a spell, which is a cool use of, giving a magic item to a character that didn't already start as a blood mage, but might want to go down that route. So a lot of good stuff. And again, I love that we get original artwork for all these items. It's something we hardly ever get for magic item supplements. Are usually always lacking in actual artwork, and this one goes above and beyond, which is really cool to see. The Philosopher's Stone, by the way, is held by Nameia. All of the villains have just a bunch of super sexy items that they actually have equipped. And she has that one because her big backstory is that she has simulacrums of that she's used to clone herself several times over. So, and I think, in fact, the villain of Nameia's Laboratory is actually just one of those clones. So, kind of a neat little thing right there that we actually get mechanics for the Philosopher's Stone in D&D 5e. And then we get a whole bunch of monsters. So first is a section of monsters that apparently existed in earlier editions of D&D and have now been converted to 5th edition. I'm not terribly familiar with earlier editions of D&D outside of video games like Baldur's Gate and Neverwinter Nights, so I just kind of assume that this is the case. Although I did recognize one of them, which was that organ-filled skeleton, this nice-looking chap, the Morgue, which uses its intestines as like creepy, crawly attack things, which is very nasty. But all of these enemies do kind of have they're not necessarily blood themed, but they're very like disgusting themed. Like I picture all of them as just squelching and being really gross, a whole lot of kind of flesh golem-esque things. There's demons and devils, but if you wanted blood stuff, we've got blood oozes, we've got blood hulks, we've got blood fiends, blood elementals, blood demons, you name it, we've got bloody versions of it with really good art throughout. I thought what was more useful, however, was the NPCs, which is, the distinction between NPCs and monsters is that NPCs are typically, humanoids, and they're not obviously built like players because they're not supposed to be as strong, but they take kind of the broad strokes of what players are and what they have and simplify them into simple stat blocks that DMs can use. And we get that here based on all of the new player subclasses that were added in the first chapter. We get 2 of those for a total of 24 new NPC stat blocks. One is a CR5 and one is a CR10, and they seem to do a pretty good job of, taking whatever of those good abilities from, those that made those subclasses unique and transform them into unique NPC stat blocks, which is really cool. I love it when a supplement does that and actually gives you kind of example NPCs to use. And plus, honestly, most blood themed stuff is going to be evil related. Blood magic is generally considered evil in most universes, and the odds of using the blood magic stuff for enemies versus players, I would think it's going to lean more towards enemies. So being able to use, and this also helps you again build upon using the Crimson Order as a evil villainous faction that can send out different agents. You've already got the top brass reigning evil villains, and this allows you to basically use minions, which is again why I made the analogy between the Crimson Order and any one of those elemental cults, because I think that's the same kind of power structure there, and you could easily do an entire, sub campaign or overall campaign just based on this Crimson Order, which is pretty cool. And we get a lot of information there, so I think that's a really nice add. All right, let's go over my pros and cons for Nameia's Crimson Tome. Pro, highly thematic and interesting blood-themed spells and magic items. Loved it. Pro, lovely original artwork for NPCs and magic items. Really impressive with all the art that we got, and it looks great. Pros, 24 NPC stat blocks that use the new player subclasses. Anytime you give me new player material, if you can also give me NPCs based on that player material, that is a huge plus. And pros, a detailed lore about the Crimson Order, which focuses on its nasty leaders. You can effectively, as I mentioned, create an entire adventure based on this Crimson Order because they give you a lot of good information here. Cons, numerous grammatical errors. It's just kind of inexcusable at this point. It needs an editor. You need to go through and clean up all of the actual text. And with it being this long, I would have had to find a number of problems with it to actually make my con, and unfortunately I did. And the other con is that the actual Chapter 1 is probably the weakest, the actual subclasses, as most of the new subclasses don't fit the blood theme as elegantly as others. There were, again, maybe 3 or 4 of the 12 that I actually liked and thought were interesting. It's hard to complain about getting, more than what you need, but it's just an example of how I don't think all of these subclasses actually needed to have all the blood-themed abilities. But the ones that did, the ones that I liked were pretty cool. Final verdict. With 12 new blood-themed subclasses, over a dozen bloody magic items and NPCs, and an evil cult dedicated to the Blood Lord, Nameia's Crimson Tome should easily handle all your sanguine needs. Thank you for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson, and you can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.